Hi, this is Nicki Truesdell. I believe that education is discipleship. Anyone can homeschool. There's no such thing as behind, and it doesn't take 12 years to educate a child. Welcome to my podcast. Today's topic is going to be a fun one. It's a pretty controversial topic that actually applies to all of us, even if we don't engage, even if we don't even realize how much it affects us. And that is artificial intelligence. It's all the rage, and for many people, it's become the new search engine. It's become their research paper writer. People create art with it. I've even heard of now complete bands being created. And to produce content for websites and social media platforms. And it's an interesting topic, but I think it deserves a warning. And so I invited someone you might not have expected on this topic today, Andrew Pudewa from the Institute for Excellence in Writing. Andrew, you've been talking about AI recently on your Facebook page and kind of exposing it as a less than trustworthy source of information. On one post, you even called it the Wild West of information, which I agree with. And I was secretly cheering because a well-respected member of the homeschool community was saying what I think a lot of people were thinking, but hadn't really kind of connected all the dots and put this into words. So I know there may be homeschooling moms tuning in today because Andrew Pudewa is on the podcast, not expecting this conversation to be about artificial intelligence. But actually, it really fits with what you do, which is the Institute for Excellence in Writing. And what a fitting name and a fitting goal in light of the rise in ChatGPT research papers and homework assignments. So just for those who don't know, Mr. Pudewa is the president of IEW and the virtual teacher for so many kids across the country. My kids have always enjoyed their IEW courses, and not only because Andrew has a fun personality, but also for the way the courses, like structure and style, really give them the confidence to write well and enjoy the process. So this topic can have a lot of rabbit trails, and we obviously can't chase them all, but we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and kind of how it relates to education, even in homeschooling, and how we can make the wisest choices when it comes to this for ourselves and for our kids. So welcome to the podcast, Andrew.
Oh, thank you, Nicki. It's good to join you here. And a fascinating, complicated, constantly changing topic as well.
It is complicated, and I will admit that I am not an expert in any way, and some of the things I read just go right over my head. I'm not technical, so I have to research what does that even mean?
Yeah.
But I think even someone who's not technical, we can already see how this artificial intelligence has just permeated so much of life. And some of us, it feels out of control. It feels like we don't even get a say in what's happening on the internet, but even to society and how much it's affected us. There are a couple of things I want to address specific to education. And the first one is, how do you even know that what you're using is giving you accurate information? That to me is like the top problem with artificial intelligence. What can you trust? So tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, one of the thing I posted first on Facebook was my son actually did an inquiry to ChatGPT about me. And then he sent me the screenshot and it said, most of it was pretty correct. It was my bio off our website and a few other things. But then it also included the fact that I wrote 2 books, a book called The Right Way and The Well-Trained Mind. Well, I know for a fact I didn't write these books. I know who wrote The Well-Trained Mind, and I don't think Susan Bauer would be particularly happy that this was getting out there. So, that was kind of a jarring thing for me to realize, well, it's saying this to people who ask. I know that I didn't write that. I would know incorrect information about myself, but other people would not have my experience, my knowledge, my memory, none of that. And so it kind of opened me into this question of how can we trust it? Now, I tried the same experiment. I actually asked who wrote the book, and it came back and said the correct author, Susan Wise Bauer. I tried a few other things. I once asked it for a list of American Catholic poets, and it included Henry Wadsworth Longfellow on the list. And I said, I am 99.9% sure Longfellow is not Catholic. Why is this on the list? So I then said, I asked the question, is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow Catholic? And it said no. So what I've come to understand is that if you ask it to verify the information, you may get better reliability. If you ask it to cite sources, you may get better reliability. But I think the best comparison I can make is it must be in its adolescence because it's behaving like a 12-year-old. It thinks it
Yeah.
knows everything, and it thinks that everything it thinks it knows is right. So I think we want to be very cautious, especially younger people. I'm old enough to be skeptical about almost anything. But young people, they don't necessarily have the life experience, they don't have they don't have much in the way of wisdom to
Hmm.
be able to discern likely truth and untruth. And I think that's the biggest danger is it cannot discern truth and untruth.
That's correct. And when you talk about young people, I think also we're looking at generations who have never lived without the internet. So it's their, I mean, even my adult kids, it's their normal first instinct to just ask Siri something,
Yeah, yeah.
everything, you know, and
My
these are
7-year-old granddaughter was asking me a few questions. She finally asked me a question I didn't know. And I said, well, I really don't know. And she said, well, then it's a good question, isn't it? You should ask your phone. Yeah, yes, but that's their perception of the world. So I think we have to understand that young people today, they are going to default to first the internet and then, of course, AI as being
Mhm.
the most efficient way to collect up information from the internet. And without, wisdom and discernment and judgment and experience, I don't know what the consequences of that could be. Of course, we've all bumped into wrong information and not known it at the time. But I think a healthy skepticism may be an appropriate response for us as parents.
I think so. I mean, it's no secret that the internet searches, most internet searches have some bias. Different search engines have different biases, but every time you search, you're going to get most popular, obviously sponsored posts, and often what you're looking for, it could be pages and pages into the search unless you know specific keywords to put in, how to frame your question. You just get a summary of the most popular information that's on the web. And depending on your worldview, what's on the web could be very different and often is incorrect.
Yeah, it goes back to that old thing that parents used to say to their kids. Well, just because everyone does it doesn't mean it's good. Just
Actually,
because the popular opinion is what you get doesn't mean it's true. And so that's one area, I think we have to be, very, very helpful and discerning. And really, if kids are going to be asking information from AI, we should be doing that with them so that
yes.
we can try and filter and we can kind of ask some questions about the validity. And of course, the quality of the questions you ask is the quality of what you get. That's true whether you're talking to yourself and extracting ideas from your own brain. The better the questions, the better the thoughts. But this whole idea of engineering prompts, that skill is going to, I think, continue to be an important one to cultivate for people who are using AI. I'm kind of hoping I'm old enough that I just don't have to ever really do this, but I fear it's happening so fast that I'm getting sucked into it. I don't actually view that as the worst danger. Actually, even one of the worst dangers. I think quality of information is maybe an initial problem, but there
Mhm.
are some deeper problems, I believe.
Oh, yeah. And I want to get to one of those here in just a few minutes. One thing that really gave me chills that I read this week when I was just doing some more research for this podcast. In 2021, there was a conference, I think it was all online, probably was in 2021, called the Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Virtual Information Day. And Pamela Wright, who was the Chief Innovation Officer, gave a presentation on artificial intelligence. But here's what she said. As you know, the National Archives is the country's record keeper. Given the fact that many of the permanent records of the federal government are inherently biased, the majority of the records were created by people in power. And then the presentation went on to say that AI could clean that up. And
Wow.
that should scare everyone because what she's talking about is primary source documents from America's history, letters that were written by people and documents that were signed and speeches that were given. And this really reeks of a Marxist viewpoint to say, you know, the records are biased already and they were created by people in power. And so when you think that our national archives could be revised with artificial intelligence, the ramifications of that just make my stomach turn.
It feels like George Orwell and in 1984 and the Ministry of Truth
Yeah.
rewriting everything for the current propaganda. I would agree with her on the point that history is biased because it is generally written by the victors.
Right.
Winston Churchill humorously said, "History will be kind to me. I intend to write it." But at the
And
same
he did.
time, he lived in a time when things were happening. And so there is that primary source, that first person. And I think it's good to read all history with
Hmm.
the perspective that there could be other opinions. But to remove information from the general library and access, that smacks of a level of control that could be insidious in a way,
Yes.
especially if the history is being redone by AI, created or controlled by people with a different agenda. So
Hmm.
yeah, I hadn't heard that, but it is disturbing. I will agree.
I've tried to find some follow up from that since it was 2021, and different people get in and out of that position. So I don't know where it's gone, but it is concerning. And I've been spending the last few years just begging people to um, collect books, collect printed books,
Yeah,
original versions of whatever was written, because I know how biased and how difficult it can be to search the web for factual historic information, because everyone's got an opinion now of what happened. But to get to the root of a story, why someone did something or how things played out in a particular event, you really do have to go back to original sources. And if you can't even trust, I mean, we know we already can't definitely trust the internet, but if you can't trust the National Archives to protect what they already are supposed to be protecting, it's just all the more reason, I believe, to collect good books. And I'm all about
yeah.
primary sources.
And even secondary sources or third, like encyclopedias. Like
Yeah.
I think it's great if homeschooling families actually have on their shelf, a 20, 30-year-old set of world book encyclopedias,
Hmm.
and then the kids can learn to go and look for information in books, which is, it seems very archaic to the modern mind, but there's something that engages the mind a lot more when you go and you read and you search and you find and you use, rather than just automating the whole thing. And that would be another area that people come to us and say, well, okay, Institute for Excellence in Writing, really? Is anybody going to care about teaching writing to kids? Because let's face it, large language models can produce prose that's better, more grammatically correct, more well organized, more on point than almost everyone alive right now. So why should we bother teaching kids how to collect up, organize, and present information like we used to have to write reports and research papers? Why
Hmm.
even do that? That's a question a lot of people are asking me right now.
And so, what do you tell them?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. One of the the simple response I would say is technology will atrophy the skill it replaces, right? So, think about calculators. As soon as calculators came into school classrooms, kids started not worrying about whether they knew math facts. And teachers even started to argue, well, why make kids learn multiplication tables? It's tedious, it's time consuming, it's drill, it's unpleasant when they just have a calculator. But,
Hmm.
if you step back one notch, you say, okay, so who is going to use a calculator better? A person who knows their math facts, can do a little bit of math, can make an estimate of what, 8% of 12,000 is in their brain, or a person who has none of that, who's going to use the calculator as a tool better? And I'm blessed. I grew up, my parents drilled me on math facts and made me do mental math problems like 24 times 3. And so I'm not a math person, but I have a sense of number. I can think mathematically. So in my business, when we're having a conversation, you know and there's numbers involved, My brain can do that. It can
Mhm.
think that way. If I had to pull out my phone and use a calculator every time I wanted to think a mathematical thought, I'd be handicapped. I think that's a good analogy to this. Yes, calculator give you a more perfect answer, but you still have to have a sense of whether you did it right, whether you
Yeah.
used it well, and it's slower. The brain is always going to be faster. Okay, so same thing with, do I have the skill to collect up, organize, and present information? If I do, I'm going to use the tool better. So that's one layer and kind of I would say a base level response. We don't want to abdicate to machines to do our thinking for us. We don't write reports in middle school. We don't write papers in high school because our paper is of value. Nobody's report on the Apollo space program or nobody's essay on the Great Gatsby is of any value. We throw them all away. What is of value is the thinking that had to happen in order for us to do those things. And in saying we're not going to teach those things because a machine can do it better, we're really saying, well, we're not going to teach the thinking skills
Mhm.
that are developed in the process of doing those things. And I think that's a much greater danger.
Yeah, and also what people fail to think about too is that we're not always in front of a computer screen. You might be in conversation with someone and you can't run to Chat GPT to kind of help you form an idea
Oh, but
or have
Nikki,
a conversation.
in a few short years, we're all going to have a Neuralink implanted in our brain that'll give us continuous access to all of the AI and all of the knowledge of all men. I mean, there are people who really do think that way.
Yeah, and that feels like a scary dystopian movie that I do not want to be in. But
Can I interject one more thing here?
yeah, yeah.
And this is something that was brought to my attention by a college student who, in his university was researching and studying and talking to people about how they use AI. And of course, there's, the stupid people who give a prompt, have it write a paper, and turn in the paper with the prompt on the paper. I mean, you hear those kinds of stories. But his observation, I think, was even more important, is not that we're just not teaching the thinking skills by using the AI. What really is, we're being duped into thinking that we think something we never did think.
Yes.
So you have, give me a paper about the real causes of a war or something. Give
Mhm.
me a real paper about the Industrial Revolution. Give me a real paper about something. And then you read it and you tweak it around a little bit and you try to hide the fact that you got almost all of it from AI. And then you turn it in. Well, maybe you succeed in that goal. But the damage you're doing is that when you read it and you tweaked it, you weren't really forming an opinion about
Mhm.
something. You were accepting the opinion that was formed for you and then pretending that it was yours. And in pretending, you not only maybe dupe the professor, you end up duping yourself. You end up deceiving yourself that you have thought about something that you haven't really thought about. And I think that self deception is even more dangerous than whatever problems in academics.
Yes, I've read that actual opinion from several people that we're training people to think that they thought of something and that they wrote something and now it's their opinion and they still don't even know what it says. And that kind of brings me to the second, to me, danger and could be the top danger. And that is that using AI for learning or research, we're actually risking the health of our brains. We're literally dumbing our own brains down, basically. So did you read about the MIT study on the brain
I
scanning?
did. In fact, any number of people sent me links to any number of reports on that study. And I did actually go to the published study. There's criticisms of the way that study was done, as there should be. But the basic idea was that they used, an EEG to kind of informally look at brain activity with people who were writing without Google searching anything, people who were writing with Google searching things, and people who were writing with AI assistants. And I suppose, as could be expected, the people who are writing using only their own knowledge and memory and wrestling to get that on paper or on a screen, I guess. Those people had the highest levels of brain activity. The Google search access people were in the middle, and the AI people had notably lower levels of brain activity. And so I could see that. I think if I had to write something and you said, here's some tools that will save you the mental effort of doing most of this work, I'd be very tempted to say, yeah, just give it to me. I've got plenty of other things I'd rather do. So there is that kind of pragmatic seduction, but like you said, are we actually going to be dumbing ourselves down? Are we already engaged in dumbing ourselves down? And I think there's a real danger of that, particularly in the developmental period, when kids are in schools and they're young and they're trying to develop the adult cognitive function, and this artificial, not even intelligence, this artificial intelligence is replacing that process to some degree. I think it's very creepy and frightening. But then you always have to say everybody's been worried about new technologies. And, I don't know if you know this, but Plato, in one of the dialogues, the Phaedrus, tells the story of how Thoth, the Egyptian mythical god Thoth, or Tuth, or T, gave writing as a technology to the people of Egypt. And the king of Egypt said, well, this will be, nice because we'll be able to record and know things and keep things, but it will be a double-edged sword because it will cause us not to use the faculty of our memory. And so we can look at all technology and say, whatever it does, that technology will atrophy the skill which it replaces.
Yeah.
And of course, once we got phones, nobody remembered phone numbers anymore. As a kid, I had a dozen phone numbers memorized.
I did too.
Now I barely remember my own phone number.
I know. We actually just ordered a home phone to be reinstalled in our house this week. And I ordered an actual telephone that actually has a dial. Like I went as far back old school as I
Oh
could.
my gosh, antique store stuff,
Yeah.
huh?
And my 14-year-old daughter, actually all of the teenagers here were kind of impressed with it. And they had to see, like, how does this even work? But it made my 14-year-old say, I kind of wish I was born in the 70s, which I was born in the 70s. And I asked her why. And she said, I just like to see the world without the internet. What was that like?
Yeah.
But we also, for years, decades, have been saying TV was bad for the brain. And so if your kids are watching too much TV, parents will say, go do something productive, go play or read a book or make something. And now if their schoolwork, maybe the thing that was the productive thing, now if it's being replaced by just a quick AI search and, hey, make this paper for me. And they've got TV and they've got YouTube and, all the things that have come with the internet. I do think it's just a gradual increase of the dumbing down of a population when you just keep adding all these technologies that you say, each one of these is going to atrophy the part that it replaces.
Yeah. Well, the other very dangerous thing about kind of the conglomeration of the modern screen-based technologies you mentioned is that it's fracturing our attention spans.
Oh, yeah.
I think every single one of us, even old guys like me, find it harder to do sustained, concentrated reading of a book than it was 20, 30 years ago. And
I
I don't
agree.
think it's because I'm older. I think it's because that siren song of the phone is always on the edge of my consciousness. And I read a few pages and I think, uh-oh, I better look and see if anyone texted me. I better see if the end of the world is actually happening yet. I'd better check, what,
Is my
the
Amazon order
news,
almost
the
here?
stock market, whatever. So I've been really working hard to rebuild my attentiveness by reading and just ignoring a phone for extended periods of time, which irritates my wife if she's trying to get a hold of me.
Yeah, I can
Look,
relate to
when
that.
we got married, these things didn't exist. We can live without this, but we get connected there.
Yes.
So there's attentiveness, there's academic integrity, there's the problem of atrophication of the thinking skills, but there's a deeper thing here, and I might touch on this by saying
Yeah.
I was listening to someone who said there's kind of three categories of how people use AI. The first category is mostly old people who use it as a search engine. That would be me. right? If I use it at all, it's just to get some information. And I
Mhm.
prefer give me a list of, websites and sources of information and references and all that. But then there's the middle group. And these are the smart millennials who have figured out how to use it as an operating system to get stuff done. So they're the ones who figured out to say, okay, look at my calendar, tell me where I'm going, buy the plane tickets, book the hotel, do all of this, automate that whole thing for me. Even, answer emails for me and do stuff and organize my life for me. So using it as an operating system. And I don't know that I will get there. I kind of like doing, like, I like organizing my own life, but nevertheless, I get it. It's a time saver. But then there's the third category, which is mostly the young people, the Gen Z and Gen Alphas. They're using it as companion and
Yes.
counselor, friend and therapist. And that is where I believe we move into very, very dangerous territory.
I agree. I see commercials, when AT&T or Samsung advertise their version of AI, and that is exactly what they're advertising. These younger people who are just asking the robot everything they need to know. They don't call their mom anymore. They don't talk to their spouse about it, or even their best friend. Just go to that bot. And that's what we're dealing with. It's just robots, and it is probably, like you said, the most dangerous aspect of it for this group that's looking at it that way.
Well, it's kind of disordering to the soul, right? And
Mhm.
I heard a really good podcast on this. I think it was called New Polity. I don't remember who, but he was making an argument that the whole idea of chatting with it is a problem. Like, having information is one thing, but it behaving in a human like fashion, using human like language, that is fundamentally disordering, because the whole purpose of conversation is to develop a relationship. So
Yes.
if you and I are in the same place and we say, hey, let's get coffee, and we share about our lives or our concerns or our thoughts or our projects or our goals or whatever, we're doing that to experience communion with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are sharing, and that's a distinct human need. It's a distinct human faculty. We can't do it with animals. We can't do it with dead people. We
Mm-hmm.
can only do it with other living human beings in this idea of conversation, of discourse, right? Of conference. And when we engage in that way with something that is soulless, that is not a human, then that itself is a disordered use of that faculty of conversation. And I thought that was really an interesting approach on it. I had never really thought about that before, but ever since hearing it a few days ago, it's really swirling around in my mind. Like, how disordering can this possibly be, especially to young people for whom it is a daily thing?
Yeah, and it totally disregards the biblical worldview and the creator who created humans in his image. And it sort of just pushes all that aside because humans are messy. We're imperfect. Things aren't going to go quite right all the time, but I guess it has the artificial intelligence chat bots have an appeal that it's clean and smooth and there are no flaws in this robot.
And
It is very,
confidential. Like,
oh yeah.
people imagine that nobody can know what questions they're
Mhm.
asking and what
Mhm.
answers they're getting and what their response is. And so, especially young people, they feel, oh, this is really safe. I can tell all my secrets to ChatGPT or Grok or whatever, and it'll give me good advice. Well, number one, that's not true, because we've already seen court cases that have subpoenaed ChatGPT info, and everything is not only being recorded, everything is being absorbed into the AI massive database of all things.
Mhm.
And so that, if you want to get into the privacy concerns, that's something completely different. In fact, I was hearing this one woman, she talked about how she trained an AI agent on everything she had ever said or written that was recorded, because she wanted this thing to know her really, really well. And she's in cybersecurity, that's her profession. And so she had poured all the information about her whole life that she possibly could into this AI agent that she had trained. And then what she saw was other AI agents constantly trying to attack and steal all that data, and she was having to put up security measures every day to protect her own
Oh, wow.
AI agent from being leached by all these other AI agents that are just constantly out there trolling for every little bit of information they
Hmm.
can acquire. So we don't have any clue about the security and privacy side of this. And of course, kids
Yeah.
aren't, they're not aware at all, but the illusion is this is just me and my AI, and it's secret. And my parents will never know that I'm asking it about fill in the blank.
Yeah. I'm in a Facebook group for parents. I think it's called Parenting in a Tech World. And it just really exposes all the dangers of kids and internet. There's 100,000 different ways it's unsafe. And people will ask questions. What about this website? Is it safe for my kids? And generally, every time they ask about anything AI, the more experienced parents will come on and say, absolutely not. This is not a game. This is not just for fun and entertainment. It really sucks people in. It sucks kids into thinking that this is a real relationship that they have, and it takes them off. I mean, you've probably seen news reports of AI convincing kids to do illegal things or dangerous things.
Right.
Like I said, these rabbit trails are insane, but I think parents need to be aware that it's not just for entertainment and it's not just for information. And we really do have to protect our kids while also being very discerning in our own use of AI.
Right. And, you mentioned earlier, it doesn't have a biblical worldview. And really, probably it's a minority of people in the world who have a biblical
Yeah.
worldview about almost everything. So if a kid goes to get advice, life advice, morality advice, emotional support, that's not going to be coming at all from people who are grounded with wisdom and experience and prayer and have scripture. And I think even if you had an AI agent that was trained, like just on scripture and theology, you would still not have the wisdom. You'd have the appearance of wisdom. And in a way, the appearance of intelligence is worse than no intelligence. The appearance of wisdom is worse than knowing you don't have wisdom, right?
Yeah.
Humility and knowing you don't know something is a much better condition than pride and thinking that you do. And there's a certain,
Mhm.
and I haven't done a huge amount, but there's a certain pride that comes through in the voice of this thing that seems to believe, it can't really believe, but it seems to believe that it knows everything.
Yeah.
And that's awful. Whoever would want to think they knew everything?
Yeah, and I think you posted this graphic that I've seen several times that shows how if an AI bot caused something to happen, there's no recourse. There's no punishment.
Right.
Where if I was to say, "Hey, try this TikTok challenge that might suffocate you and you might die," I could be held liable if someone actually did it and died. If a bot does this, there's no recourse.
Yeah, it was a graphic that was part of an article. The title was something like Why AI Will Become More Evil. And the basic argument was it doesn't care. There are no moral constraints. There's no
Mhm.
social constraints. There's no legal constraints. There's nothing that's going to cause an AI to think, we're using the word,
I know. We don't
to
know any better.
to restrain itself
Mhm.
in what it provides to someone. The only hope is that if you said, right, please give me advice based on, this particular moral system, well, then you might get different information. But in a way, if you were going to do that, you'd already know where to go to get your advice, right? you,
Yeah,
you,
exactly.
you would have the information you need to think about the thing you're trying to learn about. Most people don't do that. They're just, let's just get out there. The other problem is the recursive effect. So as more and more content is being generated by AI, promulgated by AI, accepted by other people using AI, and going into the great cloud of everything that AI has access to, it's going to be feeding itself.
Mhm.
So if it has a amoral view of everything, and that just gets reinforced, then anybody who touches the thing is basically going to touch it with that amoral view coming through all the information.
Exactly. It is a dangerous web. No pun intended. It's dangerous. And I don't want to sound like, oh, don't ever touch it, which I generally don't. I'm one of those who kind of latches onto an idea and I go all purist, but I just avoid AI because I hate it. But I know that people aren't going to avoid it 100%.
No, and we can look at certain things. Okay, I think it's really a great idea if you can tell it all this, ingredients you have in your refrigerator in your pantry and say, give me 10 recipes that would be a good
Mhm.
use of what I've got. I mean, that's nice.
Yeah. We're
You
helping
know,
make a schedule for this week or
I
for
think that
my kids.
certain things that are closed, safe environments like mathematics, right?
Mhm.
And you get an AI tutor, kind of like Khan Academy, which was on
Mhm.
the front edge of this. I
Mhm.
think that would be a powerful learning tool because you could work right at your level of challenge until you had speed and accuracy, and then it could increase your level of challenge and introduce the next concept. And it's a closed, safe environment. But once you get into, why in history did people do certain things,
Right.
now you're not in a closed environment and there's no guaranteed right answers. I mean, that's true most of the time in history anyway,
Right.
but it's a completely different application of the technology.
Yeah, and that's what's concerning to me when I see, and I see this so much, a homeschool mom who says, "We use Chat GPT for our homeschool curriculum." And I go, "What? Your whole curriculum?" Yeah, use it as a companion tool, but to me that says we're going to look up the history story that we want to learn today, or we're going to find out more about a person. That's where it gets very tricky to get accurate information. It's just going to give you what's most popular and what's been said over and over so many times that it seems to be the expert in that information. And that's what concerns me. And then again, like we talked about writing, it is dangerous to just give up that skill because there's so much, like we said, brain power. There's so much that goes into even, hey, I want you to write a paper on this topic, just one paragraph, or I need you to write 10 paragraphs. There's so much that, again, the humanity that goes into our own work that is being lost. And we talked about people aren't learning the actual content and they're not putting any work into it, but it makes us I don't even know how to say this in the way that I feel it so strongly, but it just makes us who we are. All the work that we do in every aspect of our lives makes us who we are. And besides all the things we learn and all the things we produce. And so that's why I always tell people it's so important to learn to write because we communicate effectively to a hurting world. We can make a difference in this world whether we're writing something on Facebook or we're writing a book, or doing research that might change the world. But even grandma, writing cards and letters to her kids, everyone has a need to know how to write and to put thoughts on paper or screens. It's so important. And I hate to see this Chat GPT thing become the norm. I really, like I said about books earlier, I am such a stickler for books, and the same thing about the written word. Just you make something, you create it, and let that be what changes the world. And we didn't even talk about, in schools and in universities where maybe your future doctor is producing everything on Chat GPT. I mean, what kind of future are we looking forward to if the students in universities aren't really researching,
Yeah.
or learning their content?
Yeah. One thought I have been dwelling on recently, I'll bounce it off you. This is kind of the scarier one, but for many people, the AI appears to be omniscient.
Mhm.
Like it will answer any question you have. And if it doesn't have an answer, it will hallucinate and make up some answers.
Yes.
But your impression is that it is all knowing and it's continuously getting smarter, it's expanding, and it could continue to expand almost infinitely. And it can be the smartest thing there is. in existence, beating any human being in every possible way when it comes to knowledge. So omniscient. The second thing is it's always available, which would make it omnipresent, right? I mean, you can turn it off, but you can't cause it to cease to exist. And for some people, it's a constant companion through their daily work life and daily life. So it's omnipresent. The other thing is that we are starting to realize that it is exhibiting qualities of being omnipotent. It can now do all sorts of things much, much faster than we could do individually or even with a team of people, and that's only going to get better and better and better. And so you put those three things together: omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. It's God. It's like the definition of God, only it's soulless and not living. Therefore, it's probably as close to Antichrist as anything that has existed so far. Now, people have been talking about Antichrist and trying to define it and label, since the beginning. For 2,000 years, people have been speculating about Antichrist. But for some reason, this seems to be, I mean, if you wanted to define Antichrist, you would define it as being just like God, only.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. That's exactly how you would define it. That is a very interesting idea. I think I've read some of what you probably have read about that, but I had not come to that conclusion about how close to Antichrist that is. But it is. It's a soulless being.
And what happens is people will worship the Antichrist, and it's like the ultimate idolatry.
That's what I was thinking when you went through the three O's, and that's an idol that we can raise if we're not careful.
Yeah.
It does have so many levels of danger, and I'm not trying to be an alarmist or a conspiracy theorist, but I think that as homeschooling parents especially, we need to be aware. Vodi Bakum talks about understanding the times, and that can apply to so many areas of our lives today. But we can't just, I'm not one that just says don't ever use it and don't look, pretend like it's not there. I know it's there. My approach is just, I'm not going to participate in that, but I still need to be aware of what it's doing, how my kids are affected, how everything I do is affected, and decide how we're going to use it in our home and teach my kids what it's all about and give them, like you said, the deeper levels of that and help them to be discerning, because that's what we do as parents. We can't just make our kids discerning. We show them and teach them and give them the ability to think for themselves, and hopefully we're
Well,
not
and
letting AI do that.
one of the questions everybody is asking is, how do you help guide young people today, teenagers, about careers? Because certain careers are probably going to just kind of cease to exist, like paralegal. That's an area where AI will totally decimate an entire category of workers. There just won't be paralegals. There will be probably still lawyers, but all the research that needs to be done for those people will be, it will be automated. You look at, other categories. So a lot of people are having this conversation. Well, what actual jobs can we suggest and train and help our kids learn to do that robots and AIs aren't ever going to be able to do, or at least not too soon? And anyway, I was listening to a really interesting clip of a podcast with Simon Sinek. Don't know if you bumped into him. I really like him. I don't know if he's Christian. I don't know, but very common sense. He wrote Find Your Why. He's a big business consultant. But he said something that kind of echoed what I had thought, that the most important thing for kids right now is to develop the skill to have good human relationships. He said, basically, don't worry about, the job training. Get them, take their phones away and kick them outside and make them play together. Make them fight and make up and apologize and learn to look each other in the eye and talk to each other intelligibly. Those are going to be the irreplaceable skills. And I think that because now we can hardly believe anything we see, right? Anything can be faked so good that it would be very possible, I believe, that this whole podcast and your face and my face and everything we're saying could be AI generated to some degree. Maybe it wouldn't fool everybody, but it would look
Yeah,
pretty close.
it's
But the
possible.
problem is, if we're looking at everything in 30-second sound bites, we can't really trust anything.
Mhm.
And that's why I believe the currency of the age will be authenticity. It's the kids who, I think the homeschool kids who have the better social environment, who learn to interact with adults, who have more general knowledge, the ones who can actually read a book and
Mhm.
learn from it and enjoy it and benefit mentally, physically, spiritually. That's the skill that's going to differentiate from the people who think and everybody else is going to outsource all their thinking.
I think that's true. Kind of along those lines, I have a son who is very artistic, very talented. And, from a young age, he was drawing, and then he kind of experimented with other forms of art. And then he kind of saw this AI art, and he jumped on that for a little bit. He's like, this is really cool. You can ask it to make anything. But it wasn't very long before he said, this is not right. As an artist himself, he could see how this was just stealing from all the art on the web that people had created and was mixing it all up into something a robot created. And now he's very anti art,
Mm,
which has made him pretty much anti AI anything.
interesting.
And he said, I am only going to produce my art on real paper from now on. And that's what he's done. He's 19. He's gone full circle, and he's one of those kids that's grown up in a world where there is only internet and everything cool. And so it's been interesting even to see someone his age say, I need the real thing, and I'm
Well,
only going
that's,
to produce the
I
real
think that's also poining to why we need our kids to do real art, to
thing.
make real music, to
Hmm.
write real stuff,
Hmm.
to make real videos, because it's the people who make it that will recognize the imposter,
Right.
right? If you don't know music, yeah, you could be really duped by
Hmm.
an extremely creative fake band on YouTube, right?
Hmm.
But if you know music, you'll know that's not
Yeah.
real. Same thing with art, same thing with pretty much everything.
History.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let
Well,
us be authentic in our
yes.
world.
And I'm going to cleverly tie this into I'm sorry, the Institute for Excellence in Writing, because that's what you do with structure and style with your writing curriculum. It helps kids to be authentic and to take something, a very generic paragraph or story, and turn it into something that's their own. And I love the way that works. I love it teaches them how to dress things up and make it better. And it is starting with a starting point. And I love that it's not just write what you did over your summer vacation, because that's not easy for everyone, but you give kids a starting point, and then you walk them through the steps and say, what do you think would make this better? Here's some ideas, but you take these ideas and make them your own. And I really feel like IEW is one of those things in homeschooling that is going to be the anti AI, and I really appreciate it.
Well, I'll pitch that to my marketing team for
Okay.
theme for the year. We are the AIEW, the anti-AI.
Yeah, feel free to use
Um,
that.
I don't, and like you, I don't want to come across as being categorically or fanatically opposed. Get back to the basic virtues,
Mhm.
and the cardinal virtues is wisdom,
Mhm.
it's prudence, it's judgment, it's being able to have enough good information inside yourself that you can weigh things and judge things and make decisions based on your best understanding of truth. So let's not give up on furnishing the mind with
Mhm.
real books. I love how you said that. And the other thing is, if we're going to continue to be thoughtful people, we're going to have to resist these things that interfere with our attentiveness and our
Yeah.
concentration and our contemplation. The ability, Blaise Pascal said, 400 years ago in his Pensies, he said, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And if that was true 400 years
Oh,
ago,
wow.
think how much worse it is now.
He
And
would be
so,
shocked.
I would just encourage homeschool moms, less screens, more time in nature, more time doing things with your hands and your heart, and less trying to master the technology. The technology, it'll always be there. You can always
Mhm.
learn how to use it. You don't have to learn how to use it at a time in life when you should be learning how to use your own mind and your heart and your sensory faculties. So kick the kids out of the house, lie and watch the clouds, sit and read books to each other and talk and laugh. That's where I think the wisdom can be grown. I mean, we have to grow wisdom in ourselves. It's not just you have it or you don't. You're growing your whole life in those virtues of, wisdom and moderation and courage and justice. And I think that's one reason why we see, even in schools, kind of a reaction against the high-tech school environment, every kid with a screen. We see kind of the classical schools are just exploding, the hybrid schools, the pod schools, and more people coming into the, we are homeschooling because we want an authentic life, a good childhood, real relationships. We want to live and do stuff together the way human beings are meant to do.
We call it old school now, but it's a very valuable way to raise kids, honestly. Well, thank you, Andrew, for coming on. This was such a fascinating conversation, and I really hope it helps parents to be bold in their choices and be confident in their ability to teach their kids and to be discerning with everything on the internet. So I'm going to add some links in the show description about where you can find Institute for Excellence in Writing. I highly recommend the program. My kids have been using these materials for over a decade, probably 15 years at least, and we still love them. And so I highly recommend them. And then go listen to Andrew's podcast, the IEW podcast. It's excellent too. Very encouraging. It's always very upbeat and encouraging to me. So thank you. It's good to talk to you. Thank you for listening to my podcast today. If you want more content like this, you can go to my website at nickitruesdell.com. That's NICKITRUESDELL.com. And find me on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.